KUAM News Hotspot is brought to you by
Pacific Points, Do More, Get More, and Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
The Menu, brought to you by King's Restaurant, always open, always local, and Ruby Tuesday Guam, home of the Fresh Garden Bar.
The legislature has just passed a bill by Senator Sabina Perez to ban the open burning and detonation of hazardous waste. It follows a long-standing effort by veterans groups to warn about the often severe health consequences of burn pits. It spurred President Biden to sign in August the PACT Act, which expands VA health care and benefits for vets exposed to open burning.
This bill actually would prohibit open burning of hazardous waste, and which I think is really critical because, as we're looking, open burning of hazardous waste is one of the most harmful activities.
In her appeal to colleagues to pass her bill, Senator Perez brought up the testimony of Kaylin Perez, the daughter of the late Dr. Chris Perez, former State Surgeon General for the Guam National Guard. She testified about what happened to him after his return from deployment.
And was heavily exposed to smoke from open burning that was described as the darkest, thickest, most fouling. In 2013, her father, who was relatively healthy before he joined the Army in 2006, was not a smoker, was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer, which eventually took his life. So it's clear that as USCPA is looking to change its rules, that it's important that we limit these harmful and outdated practices that exist within the United States, including Guam.
The bill was amended to exempt disposal of unexploded World War II ordnance, which more than 70 years after the war can still be found here. But Minority Leader Chris Dueñas says there may be unintended consequences in the push to pass a bill before it's fully vetted by the experts.
You have an existence of hazardous waste in the form of unexploded ordnance, and it's not just Guam. It's a regional approach. And so the problem has to be solved, but the problem has to be solved, I believe, through coordination, through more outreach, through more discussion. Why are we arriving at a bill for something that should be forward thinking and negotiated and discussed at a level between a civilian military task force?
Admiral Benjamin Nicholson raised similar concerns in a letter to Senator Perez ahead of the session. The bill still passed 13-2, and as of this reporting, sits on the desk of Governor Leon Guerrero, awaiting her action. All right, and we're joined now by Rear Admiral Benjamin Nicholson, who, of course, is the commander of Joint Regional Marianas, to talk more about this subject. First of all, Admiral, can I ask you to explain your opposition to Senator Perez's bill? Because right after the session, it passed during the session, she came out with a news release of her own that said that the legislation does not prevent disposal of unexploded ordnance, which I guess was one of the concerns raised in your letter to her and the other senators.
Well, thanks, Nestor. First of all, I'm neither opposed nor a proponent of the bill. I want to make that very clear. What I am a proponent of is the old adage of measure twice, cut once. If you're going to do something, do it right the first time. Don't rush headlong into something without doing the full analysis to understand not only what the end state effect is that you're trying to get after, but also to determine if there are any unintended consequences or second and third order effects that haven't been thought through. So when the bill came up and there was the ability to do public comment, it was a very small window for us to get our comments in. So in a quick review of the bill, we found two glaring issues as it was written. One was a technical issue and the other one was a legal issue. And so very quickly, we responded by submitting a letter to the record pointing out these two issues. That's not to say that's all inclusive of any issues that were in there, but those are the two that stood out immediately that we were able to present. Following that, the bill was amended and they only addressed those two issues. So I have a lot of concerns that if the bill was fully vetted prior to coming to that state, and there were two enormous issues that were kind of glaring, and they fixed, what other issues are in the bill that haven't been discovered because there hasn't been a full analysis by the proper technical and legal experts? I'm not one. I probably know more about this subject than the layperson, but there are other folks that know much more than I do. And so I have offered on several occasions, including the letter that I sent, to come and talk to the legislature and even bring expertise to the legislature so they can fully understand all of the different things. Really, we are here to help on any of these situations. And had we been asked early in the process, I would have been happy to bring in the right experts to have that rich discussion and to work through some of those issues instead of rushing headlong into something without fully exploring what the different parts and pieces are to this legislation.
Yeah, thanks for explaining upfront that you're not either opposed nor support legislation, because it would be rather unusual for a high-level Department of Defense official to do so. But could you elaborate on the two particular issues that you were talking about?
Certainly. So the two that came up was the way the language was originally written. It appeared to be highly, highly restrictive, and it may have tied our hands to do what we call emergency response. And that's when people in the community or on our bases find unexploded ordnance. And generally that ordnance is from World War II, but not always. There's also other types of ordnance that you have to have some exceptions to because it's inherently unstable. None of that was properly addressed in the rewrite. That's one of the concerns of mine. The other part was in the original bill, there was language about the transshipment of hazardous material, and that went completely against federal regulations. So once again, if there had been a full review, and again, I would have, if asked, had been happy to have our experts partake in that, these things would have been caught well before the bill went for public comment. So in the short window that we had, we put in those comments. There were some amendments made, but still, I believe without a full analysis, there are the potential for some unintended consequences because it hasn't been fully thought through.
Yeah, and that offer is still on the table should the governor decide to veto the bill, right?
Actually, Nestor, the offer is always on the table. Anytime that I'm invited by the legislatures to speak on any topic, I'm happy to do so. If the legislature wants additional information and they want experts, because I'm not the expert in everything, I'm happy to get those experts. If they're on island, we can generally get them there very quickly. If we want even higher level experts, I'll get them from off island. I want to be a good partner, and I've multiple times offered these services to help the legislature understand some of these things. Often there are issues that get conflated, and it can be very confusing, especially in some of the technical jargon. Let's bring in the technical experts to work these things out, and then we can work together on these sort of things. So, yeah, I'm open to it, Nestor. Again, not just on this, but on any other thing that we'd like to work through or partner with, because I'm committed to not only my mission here that I do with the military, but I'm committed to helping Guam. And so let's do this together. I think that's just the best way to do anything that affects everybody.
In fact, in reading your letter that you sent out and released a day, I guess, before the session, you said that you will direct experts to begin reviewing this or providing a white paper or some kind of input.
Yeah, so I was very concerned, especially the way the language is originally written, but even the way the language is written today. This is why I like to take the time to do things right the first time and really go through the analysis. So if enacted, I'm going to have my experts really take a hard look and say, okay, these are our new limitations, and we may not be able to do some things that we had done before. And in the case of the original language, I was really concerned that we would be then restricted on our ability to respond to incidents out in the community, considering through a mutual aid agreement, the Department of Defense does all of the explosive ordnance disposal for Guam, whether it's inside our fences or outside our fences. So if my hands are tied, or if the hands are tied of our technicians, that concerns me. So, for example, in the updated bill, where it just talks about World War II munitions, are they asking that the technicians then on the spot have to verify that it's from World War II and not a Vietnam era? See, all of these things are the sticky issues that I think should be worked out ahead of time to make sure that it's very clear. This is the purpose. This is what's restricted. This is what is not restricted. These are how we can do things together to make sure everyone stays safe and we do things in the proper manner.
I want to talk about open burn and open detonation in a minute, but because I think that was probably one of the meatier parts of why she went for this legislation. But you also mentioned the transport of hazardous waste. What are your specific concerns regarding that?
Well, right. So federal law states that one state or territory cannot inhibit the ability of another state or territory to transship hazardous material, right? So Nevada can't make a law restricting California from shipping hazardous material that needs to go through Nevada to some disposal facility in another state. The legislation as originally written would have exactly done that. And then hazardous waste in CNMI could not have been shipped through Guam to a disposal facility in the United States. So that's an example of where the original legislation was just absolutely crosswise with federal law. And that should have been caught much earlier on if there was a full legal analysis of that done, which is, again, why I'm concerned that a full legal analysis needs to be done with the right experts to say, okay, this is what's going to happen, or here's the potential pitfalls. And again, I'm more than happy to have the legal experts that we have, and we have quite a few on staff that are environmental experts, and they really understand this stuff very, very well. They understand the federal statutes, and they can help, coordinate and go through this sometimes confusing, legal maze of what it means when you do this or that and what the impacts are.
All right, we got to take a short break, and we'll be back with our discussion with Rear Admiral Benjamin Nicholson right after this. All right, and we're back. And Admiral, before the break, we were talking a little bit about open burn and open detonation, and which is one of the main parts of the bill. Even though the senator had written back and said that it's not prohibited under her bill, and she sent out a copy of her bill. What are can you elaborate more on what your continued concerns are about that provision?
Sure. It's once again, it goes down to making sure we fully understand what the desired end state is, and what the implications are of implementing something in a particular way it's written. So I want to explain a little bit, because a lot of times this gets very conflated. You can see in the bill, it talks about clean technology and dirty technology, right? And it's a push to go to clean technology. I understand the intent, but what's not talked about there is, even in the methods that are used for the so-called clean technology, and there's a hazardous waste stream that's created, right? So if you do a method that, for example, there's a couple of different ways to do this, but one of the primary methods is you use a heat to basically bake out the what's inside of the munition, the explosive material. Well, that liquid is now hazardous material that has to be stored, it has to be shipped, and it has to be treated. None of that is talked about. Or another popular method is using a water lance. Well, now you've created even a larger volume of hazardous material, because the water mixes with the high explosive in there, and then that comes out again. Now you have a liquid that has to be stored, shipped, and treated somewhere else. So there are many other things that go into this. And again, this is why I think that we need to fully, with the right experts, explore what's the actual thing that we're getting after, or that the legislature desires. How is the best way to go about achieving that, instead of rushing to, well, we want this. Well, but there's other implications that go along with doing something a particular way. That's once again why I am offering to partner with the legislature, to bring the right experts in, to have those discussions so it's fully understood, and we can help. We can quite honestly help if they want to craft particular legislation to help them avoid pitfalls in that legislation.
You know, the issue of open burn pits, this kind of came to a head, I believe, when President Biden signed in August the PACT Act, which expands VA healthcare and benefits for veterans who were exposed to these open burn pits. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Nestor, this is once again where we said earlier, sometimes issues get conflated, right? So the burn pits are typically for disposal of garbage. It's something that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's something that I experienced in Afghanistan when I was deployed there. That is very different than the open burn methodology for disposing of ordnance. They are completely two separate things. And so this is where, once again, I think we need to have the experts come together to then help explain these sort of things, so they don't get put together mistakenly, and you think one thing and it's actually something else. So yeah, absolutely. On the open burn pits, the burn pit legislation, hey, again, I was personally there in Afghanistan where we had to use burn pits. So yeah, that's something that's very close to me, that I want to make sure that we take care of all of our service members. But that is a very separate issue than the open burn disposal method that is authorized under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Now, that being said, we haven't used that method here in Guam in decades. So I just want to clarify that. Thanks, Nestor. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there was an explosive ordnance disposal in the CNMI, I think just yesterday, as we're taping this. Talk about that and what impact, if any, Senator Perez's law would have on something like that.
Sure, good. That's a great question. So the amended law, I don't believe, but again, I'm not the expert, and I would rather have a full legal analysis and technical analysis to see if it impacts the CNMI. But we have the responsibility for our explosive ordnance disposal teams. We cover the CNMI as well, too. Now, a big difference in the CNMI is that their local fire and emergency services work together with the police. They have the ability to, not always, but when they find some unexploded ordnance, they often have the ability on their own to transport it and store that, and to wait until our technicians can get up there to properly dispose of that. That's not always the case. But what happened yesterday was over time, there had been munitions that had built up that had been taken by fire and emergency services and CNMI. And it was just the time frame that we sent our technicians up there to destroy those munitions. Now, in the original bill, where it prohibited the transshipment of hazardous materials, that potentially could have impacted that sort of thing. But right now, I'm not so sure if there's an impact or not.
All right. Now, that bill passed 12-2, which suggests to me that there is strong support in the legislature. As I mentioned earlier, it's now before the governor. You wouldn't be able to give what your recommendation would be on any action on that bill at this time, would you?
So I neither support the bill nor do I oppose the bill. But again, I do fully support fully educating everyone on this. Furthermore, I'm very concerned that the provision of the bill gives the Guam EPA only 90 days to implement recommendations. That's a pretty big ask of an organization that's extremely busy. And I know they're extremely busy because they do a lot of the review of the projects that we're doing here on Guam. So now this is an additional tax on the Guam EPA to do something that, quite frankly, probably could have been figured out a long time ago had the right folks been brought in from the beginning to do this. Now we're rushing into doing something and forcing an agency to try to figure out how to implement it, instead of taking a little time to say, well, wait a second, let's get all the right people together. Let's review this. Let's go through and maybe write this in a manner that's the right way to approach something, so we don't have to overburden and overtax the Guam EPA to implement something that's going to have, quite frankly, probably a number of issues.
All right, we got to take another break, and we'll be back with our discussion with Rear Admiral Benjamin Nicholson right after this. All right, we're back, and let me change the subject to something a little bit more positive, Admiral. The fiscal year 2023 National Defense Authorization Act has passed, and so that means hundreds of millions of dollars for both the Marine Corps base Camp Bloss and for the missile defense system. Your take on that?
Well, it's always good to see that our budget's passed for the National Defense Authorization Act. Obviously, having money is one of the things that we need to do to move forward. A lot of different provisions in the NDAA. As you know, it's an enormously large document. I've been going through just some small parts, really focusing on the parts that affect the Pacific and Guam in particular. So the good news is what I see there is a commitment for the missile defense system, which, by the way, is something that we're working on just about every day. Our folks are in contact with the Missile Defense Agency, really helping out to plan where the parts and pieces of the system are going to go, what it's going to look like, how we're going to support that. In addition to that, I saw that there was a pretty hefty $7.3 billion put against unfunded requirements. We have a number of unfunded requirements here on Guam that we want to get after some things. So that's really good. And then also money put towards the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which is going to impact the region as well, too. So there's a number of different things that are in there. I will tell you one thing that's in there that hasn't caught a whole lot of attention, but it's something that's very important to me, is there is now a provision in the NDAA to provide money to service members that are doing a permanent change of station overseas, money to offset the cost of moving their pets. This has been something that has been quite a bit of difficulty for our service members here on Guam. So I'm excited about that. We're still waiting to see what the implementation guidance of that will be, but really good to see something like that. So there's all sorts of things in that NDAA, and it takes a little while to digest all of them. But I think the outlook for the region and the outlook for Guam in particular is very good.
All right, wanted to dive deeper into the missile defense system. One of the requirements, I guess, of this bill was that a senior defense official be the one to oversee it. What does that mean? Who is that, and what will he or she do?
That's a great question, Nestor, and I'm not entirely sure. But what's happened is we're doing something that's unlike things that we've done in the past. So in the past, we have put missile defense systems in various places. We put them temporarily. That's generally with some sort of Army missile defense system, or we put some permanent systems, say in Poland and Romania, with a Navy missile defense system. Here in Guam, what we're trying to do is to combine the best of both worlds. So Army systems, Navy systems, all kind of put together in one. Well, when you start doing things that go across multiple services, you need someone above those departments to help direct that, to make sure it's managed properly, so the two services aren't working against each other accidentally, trying to do the same thing or these sort of things. So that's what I believe that they're getting after. I can't tell you for sure, but we'll see as this is implemented. But there does need to be a little bit more oversight to make sure it all parcels and pieces together so it can all work the right way.
I see. So if someone asks who's in charge here, they can point at that particular person.
Yep. And that person can make the hard decisions. Like, okay, we're going to put this here and this over here, not two things in the same place. So those are the kind of things that I anticipate happening as they kind of figure this out.
But it won't be like a bifurcated or trifurcated system, if that's a word, between, the Army and the Missile Defense Agency and that sort. It will just fall under, kind of be one system falling under that person.
Yeah.
How's it going to work?
The answer to that question is yes and no. It is a little bit bifurcated in that the systems are going to be coming from, some system will come from the Army, some system will potentially come from the Navy. The Missile Defense Agency will create some systems, right? So there, when it comes to how those things are put together and funded, there is a little bit of that takes place separately. And there may be some separatism as far as in how they're manned, right? So the Army soldiers man the Army portion, and maybe another service mans the other portion. But at the end of the day, the biggest part of this is it's integrated. So when all of the parts and pieces come together, there's a single command center that's making the decisions on how it works together. So it starts off as different pieces that are kind of put together, but they have to be integrated so they work as one entire system.
And as I understand it, they've allocated about almost $400 million just to study this.
Yeah, there's quite a bit that needs to go into it because, again, this is creating something that hasn't been done before. As I've said in the past, most of the time our missile defense systems are in one single location, and they generally face in a particular direction of the threat. Here on Guam, we're looking at a protection 360 degrees from every different angle around the island, and for threats that come from very high up in altitude to low on the horizon. So that requires a number of different systems, but it also requires them to be dispersed in various locations around the island. And then we have to integrate that together so it's one system that works in concert with itself.
All right, we got to take one last break, and we'll be back with some final thoughts from Admiral Benjamin Nicholson right after this. Okay, we're back. And Admiral, we've only got about a minute or so left. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to wish everybody happy holidays, if you would.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Nestor. One of the things that I've learned here in my time in Guam is how welcoming everybody is and how this is really one big island family. So I spent this past weekend, I spent a little time with some of the war survivors in one of their events as they remembered Christmases from the past that they missed when they were children during the occupation. And it was really great to see those folks here, much more elderly than they were at the time that they missed those Christmases, but full of life and laughter. And it's great to be with those sort of people. And that's what I see all throughout Guam. So with that being said, I would like to wish everyone a very, very joyous holiday season. Whatever faith that you practice or don't practice, have a great time with your family and friends, and have a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year.
All right. Same to you, sir. Rear Admiral Benjamin Nicholson, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you, Nestor. Appreciate it.
I'm Nestor DeConto. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on The Hub.